Steve Blank is an adjunct professor at Stanford and a co-founder of the Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation. His latest class at Stanford University is Technology, Innovation, and Great Power Competition, which is providing crucial insight on how tech will and can shape elements of national power. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
The Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation at Stanford. Now, you're a co-founder. This is a novel approach at solving these seemingly unsolvable national security challenges. How is the center training the next generation of NatSec leaders and innovators?
That's a great question. And probably, if you don't mind, I'd start with what was the motivation to start yet again another center and another university and another national security space. And it just dawned on us that sitting at Stanford, we probably had a unique view of what was happening to the DoD and national security ecosystem writ large. As number one, obviously, we're in the center of technology. And the technologies we were looking at were semiconductors and cyber and biotech and autonomy and drones and, quantum, and the list goes on. And, a good chunk of those are being funded and being built in Silicon Valley, and a good chunk of those are spun out of Stanford. But the other observation is, but a good chunk of them are no longer owned by our FFRDCs that are our federally funded research and development labs or the military labs. And a good chunk of, in fact, a good chunk of those technologies are now available commercially off the shelf, and even more so, a good chunk of them are coming from China. So number one is the DoD was facing a set of technology threats that for the first time in the history of the DoD, the most advanced technologies in the world were no longer owned by the DoD. It's a big idea, because number two is our acquisition and research and engineering ecosystem inside the DoD historically has been inward facing. That is, we talked to our own ecosystem, and we were dependent on either our primes or FFRDCs, et cetera, assuming they had the most advanced technology. Our contention was that in some cases that's no longer true. So that was one observation. The second observation was that, in Silicon Valley, we tend to build things with speed and urgency, taking risks that are different than obviously you take when the life of a warfighter is on the line. But those methodologies, the lean startup and design thinking and others, actually are, in some cases, applicable to actually building and deploying weapon systems. And the U.S. in the past has actually operated with that speed and urgency. And in fact, actually quite recently, when we had the Rapid Equipping Force in Iraq and Afghanistan and JIDA to defeat IEDs, but we kind of forget all those when we get back inside the buildings with no windows. And so that was number two. So one was tech, the other was those lean methodologies, and the other third at Stanford is, much like other great research universities, we had have a great combination of international policy, but world-class engineering students. And it was that Venn diagram that we thought we could put together to think about these problems. So that's the background to the question you didn't even ask. And so when we started working on this, Admiral Selby, who at the time headed up the Office of Naval Research, was also talking about a way to think about the impact of innovation on the Navy, which he called the small, the agile, and the many. That is, not as a replacement to carriers, but as a way to actually complicate an adversary's targeting problems and to create opportunities for ourselves to think about thousands or tens of thousands of autonomous or semi-autonomous things being deployed in Indo-PACOM, which, by the way, we could talk more. It was great to see that Secretary Hicks just announced, kind of unveiled essentially DARPA's Assault Breaker 2, and now is moving it into the Navy and into the DoD. So we thought that would be maybe a great adjunct for the Navy and others. And so the ONR funded our center to start thinking about these things. And so there are two lines of effort inside our center to finally answer your questions. One is an education component. We teach a class called Technology, Innovation, and Great Power Competition, which essentially discusses every one of those issues that I've raised, which was not only the impact of commercial technology, but the organizational design of the existing DoD infrastructure, and why is it so hard to actually not only acquire but actually deploy at scale systems that aren't built by existing primes, and why can't we do it with the speed of our adversaries. And then the second is we have kind of research programs by individual students or teams of students who work on problems of interest, most of them in the South China Sea, but in other places as well. So that's what the Gordian Knot Center does. And what was a kind of a generally vague interest, I think, in the DoD 3-4 years ago when we started talking about that, technology and great power competition has now become front and center as I think everybody now understands that our existing force design can't match or will have a difficult time with what our adversaries, particularly China, has deployed. And we've seen the impact of autonomy and drones and advanced ISR in Ukraine at scale. And I think it's impacting everybody's thinking. So that's what we were thinking about when we started it. I think we've had some world-class lessons on the battlefield to make the point.